I don't believe that that's true, and I don't think that's been completely substantiated. The United States is trying to work with Turkey, is trying to work with Saudi Arabia to stem the flow of this. And, when we talk about the Assad regime, let's not leave out the fact that a report just came out that the Assad regime used poison gas, sarin gas probably, which killed 31 resistance fighters,
yes,
not about 35 miles from home. So the United States, President Obama has said that the Assad regime using poison gas, weapons of mass destruction like that is going to be a game changer in this war, and that may be just what happens.
Well, you referred to the chemical weapons issue there, Mr. Kaplan. I'll save that issue for the next questions. We're going to bring that up again. But again, on the issue that you say the United States is actually overseeing things taking place there and is in trying to ensure that the weapons, for instance, don't fall into hands of the wrong people. But a lot of analysts are saying, how can that happen when we are seeing this immense wave of terrorism right now in Syria, the fact that Al-Qaeda are across the country right now in Syria, they're referring to the various border regions as well. How can the United States ensure that the aid that it's sending, that the weapons that are being sent are not going to fall into the hands of Al-Qaeda? Is that even possible?
Well, that's the question. Is it possible? I'm telling you that the State Department is at least trying. They're trying to work with the Turks on this. They're trying to work with the Saudis on this to try and prevent that situation. It's an almost impossible situation, I'll grant you. But, let's be clear here about Assad's regime also. They are terrorists also, and they murder their own people too. So, you have a Free Syrian Army which is trying to depose him and get rid of him, and he should be gotten rid of. There's also the issue of Hezbollah too. This is the first time that Hezbollah is losing power in Lebanon, and this is something that we have to take into consideration also. Now, I'm not defending Al-Qaeda by any means, and certainly not defending Ayman al-Zawahiri. Something which is extremely of importance is that the Canadians just foiled a terrorist plot out against a train. And according to the Canadians, these were Al-Qaeda fighters who had their base in Iran. So I'm not even sure that we're arguing about the same thing here, because the whole situation is such a, as I said, a Gordian knot tied together. It's so confusing. Well, it's very difficult to figure out who's right and who's wrong.
Okay, referred us to the issue of Hezbollah as well. But first, let's start with what you told us about the chemical attack issue. And you said the Syrian government should also be accused of terrorism on this as well. Now, Mr. Mackey in London, first of all, concerning the chemical issue, we've heard right now Israeli officials and also the United States and NATO voicing concern about the use, they say, of chemical weapons by the government. The government, on the other hand, has been saying that it wants an international probe into the use of chemical weapons by insurgents in Khan al-Assal. Now, what do you think these allegations are about, and is there any way to confirm whether chemical weapons have been used by either side?
Well, of course, the United Nations, in regards to the issue of chemical weapons, has not been very clear. It has been ambiguous and vague. Ultimately, the Syrian government, I do not think, has a policy of using chemical weapons. It is not in the interest of the regime to use chemical weapons. And even if they did use chemical weapons, it would need a force of UN monitors to actually identify and substantiate whether they were used. The closest form of evidence we have to chemical weapons being used is the attack on Khan al-Assal by the rebel forces, which was substantiated by Russia. And when the Syrian government asked the United Nations to send a team to investigate this was completely rejected by the United Nations, and some of the Western states said that this was out of the equation. So we also saw videos for rebels using chemical weapons, sarin nerve gas, on rabbits, saying that they would use them on ethnic minorities, and the ethnic minorities were not safe from the use of chemical weapons. So the only groups inside of Syria who have actually stated they want to use chemical weapons are the armed opposition. To the issue of weapons of mass destruction, no weapons of mass destruction have been used in Syria, as opposed to what the Americans used in Iraq using depleted uranium, or the weapons used in Libya, or even the atomic bombs dropped in Japan at the Second World War. We have to really equate what is happening. The state which has used chemical weapons in the Middle East is not Syria, it was Iraq. And also, the use of weapons of mass destruction region is not substantiated with the Syrian government, as they have not used any of these weapons,
Yes.
whereas the Americans have. So it is very hypocritical for the Americans to state that we are against Jabhat al-Nusra. They blacklisted them, yes, but the same day they started to send non-lethal aid. They send weapons and communication support, intelligence support, giving rebels more information on Syrian troop deployments, giving them wanted to give them armoured vehicles, armour, to be able to protect themselves. This is not the way you stop the funding of Al-Qaeda. Okay.
We will continue with this discussion. I'd like to get a response from Berkeley, but just before that, let's just take a look at some of the comments that have been posted on our Facebook page by our viewers. We'll take a look at those comments and we'll be back with the discussion.
There is no doubt that Al-Qaeda is an armed wing of the CIA. It works for the benefit of the White House, even if it attacks American interests. The killing of Muslims is the only art Al-Qaeda is good at. They are very good at destroying Muslim countries and giving a negative image of Islam. Come on guys, how can you believe that two enemies like the US and Al-Qaeda are allies to fight Islam and Muslims? But wait, everything is possible these days. As long as it concerns Al-Qaeda, we hear all the evil things about it. The bad things that the US does are not always reported, but the US is destroying its image by protecting Israel and Al-Qaeda from Muslims.
Was on our Facebook page specifically
Somebody
about
say
this
something.
topic. I'll go to our guest now in Berkeley, Mr. Kaplan. Now, we heard those comments, and along those lines, I'd just like to bring this question up to you. Some have been suggesting that, looking at the situation right now in Syria, Al-Qaeda's aim is the toppling of the Assad government, and it's also shown that it's against Hezbollah. And these are aims that are shared, they say, by Israel and by the United States. Do you think these shared interests are anyhow putting these three forces together, Al-Qaeda, Israel and the United States? Because we have been hearing that, for instance, Al-Qaeda militants have been active on the Golan Heights. However, there's been no attacks, for instance, or spillover of the conflict into Israel, while there has been some spillover into Lebanon or into Turkey.
Well, again, as I said, you've got a nearly impossible situation. I mean, the question with Al-Qaeda in this particular situation is if they topple the Assad regime, will we end up with a long-term problem, as, for example, what happened in Afghanistan? And this is a very real problem. I can say this about the United States. The United States is more concerned about the humanitarian issues here, the civilians and people there who are suffering from this. One of the things I take exception to in talking about the Assad regime in this broadcast is trying to suggest that they're really good guys and that they're